Hey, we're actually, just to give a little bit of a spoiler, we're going to spend a lot of time in the New Testament because Jesus very deliberately, in the New Testament, the Spirit of God will chase the descendants of all the sons of Noah, but it's in a way that when you see it, it's like, oh, that's for sure intentional.
Lamech holds the child and steps back. Not from exhaustion, not from the weight of a newborn in his arms. He steps back because something about this child does not feel right. The room is dim. The world outside is broken ground, cursed, sky heavy, human beings doing things that cannot be spoken of in daylight. And here, in the middle of all that darkness, a child is born who looks like he does not belong to it. His skin, his eyes, the way he opens them and stares, not the unfocused gaze of every other infant. This child looks at his father like he already knows something. Lamech feels fear before he feels love. That is where the story truly begins. Not in a garden, not on a mountaintop. In a room where a father looks at his newborn son and feels the ground shift beneath him. The book of Genesis tells us Noah's name comes from the Hebrew word Nachem, comfort. Lamech names him, hoping the child will bring relief from the cursed earth, from the grinding weight of human suffering. That is the public story. That is what most people know. But there is another version, an older account, one that was buried, suppressed, and nearly erased from history. And in that version, Lamech does not feel comfort when he holds this child. He feels terror. Hi viewers, before we go any further, drop a comment below. When you first heard the name Noah, what did you think his story was really about? The ark? The flood? Something else? Tell us what you know. The ancient text that records Lamech's fear is not a fringe document. It is not invented mythology. It is a manuscript tradition that was read by early Jewish communities, quoted in the New Testament, and preserved for centuries by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church when the rest of the world was told to look away. It describes a birth so unusual that Lamech runs, not walks, to find his own father. Not for celebration, for answers. What did Lamech see in that room that drove a grown man to flee in the night? That answer changes everything you think you know about Noah. Before the flood, the world is not simply wicked. It is structurally broken. Something has gone wrong at a level deeper than human decision, deeper than bad kings or violent nations. Genesis 6 opens with one of the strangest passages in all of Scripture. And most readers move past it in 3 sentences without stopping to ask what it actually says. The sons of God come down. They see the daughters of men. They take them. And from those unions come the Nephilim, described in Numbers 13:33 as giants, beings of extraordinary size, whose very presence makes trained soldiers feel like grasshoppers standing in an open field. Read that again. Trained warriors, men who have fought and survived, men who know what danger looks like. And they look at the Nephilim and feel like insects. This is the world Noah is born into. Not a world of ordinary sin, a world where the boundary between the heavenly realm and the human realm has been crossed, ripped open, and whatever came through that opening is still walking the earth. Genesis does not explain what that fully means. It moves quickly, almost as if the author cannot bring himself to linger on it. 6 verses. Then God looks at the earth, and what he sees grieves him. The Hebrew word used there is the same root as the name Lamech gives his son Nachem, comfort, grief. The 2 words share a root because in Hebrew, real comfort only comes after real grief. And what God sees on that earth in Genesis 6 is something that requires mourning before it can be healed. This is the world that produces Noah's birth. Not a peaceful era of simple human failure. A world already in cosmic disorder. And Lamech, standing in that world, holding that child, does not see comfort. He sees a child whose appearance does not match what a human birth should produce. His fear is not irrational. It is born from a world where irrational things have already become ordinary, where heavenly beings walk among humans, where their offspring are still alive, where the ground itself is cursed and the sky feels wrong. Lamech has lived his entire life inside that disorder. And now he holds a child who looks like something that disorder cannot explain. The ancient texts that describe what Lamech saw that night, those texts were almost destroyed. Almost. The manuscript survives in the mountains of Ethiopia, not in Rome, not in the Vatican's sealed archives, not in a European university library. In Ethiopia, preserved for over 2,000 years by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, copied by hand, generation after generation, in a tradition that never stopped believing the Book of Enoch belonged in the canon of Scripture. The rest of the world forgot. Ethiopia did not. The Book of First Enoch is a real, historical, datable document.
Theology. There are also, in addition to now, I myself translated my book from a 14th, 15th century manuscript that was found in Lake Tana, the oldest we know of this.
Fragments of it were discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran manuscripts, dated between 200 BCE and 68 CE, buried in clay jars in the Judean desert and recovered in 1947. Those fragments match the Ethiopian manuscripts. Two independent manuscript traditions, separated by geography, separated by language, Aramaic fragments from Israel, Gez manuscripts from Africa, and they agree, word for word in key passages. That is not coincidence. That is convergence. The New Testament author Jude quotes the Book of Enoch directly. Jude 14 through 15 cites Enoch by name and records his prophecy as authoritative. The early church father Tertullian, writing in the 2nd century CE, treated Enoch as scripture. The text was not hidden from early Christians. It was read, it was circulated, it was known. Then the Council of Laodicea, held in 363 CE, moved to define and restrict the Christian biblical canon. The Book of Enoch did not make the final cut. And with that decision, one of the oldest surviving written accounts of the pre-flood world was effectively removed from the hands of ordinary readers for over 1,000 years. Ethiopia refused that removal. The linguistic record inside the Book of Enoch carries its own credibility. The Aramaic fragments from Qumran contain specific vocabulary terminology that matches the Dead Sea period, grammatical structures that scholars can date. When the text describes what Lamech sees in that newborn room, it uses language consistent with ancient Near Eastern literature on divine beings and human angelic encounters. This is not medieval invention. These are ancient words. And those ancient words describe a child whose body radiates light, whose face shines, whose eyes illuminate the room when he opens them. Lamech looks at that child and his first thought is not, "This is my son." His first thought is, "This is not mine." What happens next inside that room, no one talks about it. Lamech runs. That is what the Book of Enoch records. Not a quiet question to his wife, not a private prayer. A man in full fear, leaving the room where his newborn son lies, going straight to his own father Methuselah, the oldest man who ever lived, and asking him to go further, to travel to the ends of the earth, to find Enoch himself, because Lamech cannot explain what he saw. The passage in 1st Enoch, preserved in the Aramaic fragments recovered at Qumran, records Lamech's exact state of mind. His heart is troubled. He suspects the child does not belong to him, not because of marital unfaithfulness in the ordinary human sense, but because the Watchers, the fallen angelic beings described in Genesis 6, have been crossing that boundary. They have been among human women. Their children walk the earth. And when Lamech looks at his newborn son glowing in the dark, his mind goes immediately to that reality. He thinks Noah may be one of them. That is the weight this birth carries. Not celebration, suspicion, grief, and a father's desperate need to know whether the child in that room is human. Methuselah travels to find Enoch. The account records that Enoch is at the ends of the earth. He is among the angels. He has already been separated from ordinary human life. And Methuselah reaches him and delivers Lamech's fear directly. His son has been born unlike any other child. His body is different. His eyes are different. He does not look like the other children of men. Enoch listens. And then he answers. Not with comfort immediately, He answers with context, with the full weight of what is happening in the world at that moment. The watchers have corrupted the earth. Judgment is coming. The entire human story is approaching a crisis that nothing in ordinary history can prevent. And in the middle of all of that, in a room where fear was the first emotion a father felt, something has been born that Lamech does not yet understand. Enoch tells Methuselah to go back. Tell Lamech the child is truly his. Noah is human. He is Lamech's son. But that answer only opens a deeper question. If Noah is fully human, if there is nothing angelic in his birth, then why does he glow? Why does his body carry light that no human body should carry?
Are you running into these things? I mean, because we know that the Bible says that Jesus says that in those days will be like the days of Noah. And we talk about, and this is a lot of our show, is like we return to this time of antediluvian times where, you know, the God kings walked among. And
the ancient world knew what glowing meant. This is not a detail unique to the book of Enoch. Across unconnected ancient traditions, Mesopotamian, Sumerian, Egyptian, the appearance of radiant light on a human body signals proximity to the divine. The Mesopotamian concept of Melamu describes a terrifying, overwhelming luminosity that surrounds gods and kings of divine appointment. Sumerian royal hymns describe chosen rulers as men whose faces shine. The Akkadian literature from ancient Babylon uses the same imagery: brightness, radiance, a body that does not absorb light the way ordinary flesh does. These traditions have no direct literary connection to the Hebrew account of Noah's birth, and yet they describe the same phenomenon. That convergence is not coincidence, it is a trail. Ancient peoples across different languages, different geographies, different theological systems, all arriving at the same image because the image is pointing at something real. A category of person, a type of birth. A child whose appearance announces, before any word is spoken, that what is coming next will change everything. The Sumerian king list, a real archaeological artifact, housed in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, records kings who ruled before a great flood. Their reigns span thousands of years. The document itself acknowledges that after the flood, something fundamental shifts. The nature of human kingship changes. The connection between the divine realm and the human realm changes. And the flood is the dividing line. Noah's birth happens on one side of that line. The world after the ark lands on the other. And the radiant child that Lamech held that night, the child who frightened his own father, whose appearance sent a grown man running through the dark to find the oldest human alive, that child is the hinge. He stands at the exact moment where the old world ends and the new world begins, not because he is more than human, but because the task assigned to him is more than human in its weight. He will carry the continuation of every living thing through the one event the ancient world feared above all others. The question is no longer whether Noah was human. Enoch confirms he was. The question, the one the ancient texts circle back to again and again, the one that was quietly removed from the standard biblical conversation for centuries, is this: what happened to the beings whose children were still alive after the floodwaters fell? Enoch speaks. And what he says does not close the story. It tears it open. The confirmation comes back through Methuselah, across the distance, back to the room where Lamech still stands shaking. Noah is your son. Noah is human. That is the answer Lamech asked for. A sufficient answer Enoch delivers. And for one breath, one single moment, the fear lifts. Then the rest of what Enoch says lands, because Enoch does not stop at confirming Noah's humanity. He goes further. He tells Methuselah that this child has been set apart, not elevated above human, not angelic, but chosen for a task so specific, so enormous, that the weight of every living creature on earth will one day rest on his obedience. The judgment coming is real. The corruption is real. The world Lamech sees outside his door every morning, the violence, the disorder, the boundaries that keep breaking, none of that is going to heal itself. It is going to end. And Noah, the glowing child, the feared child, The child whose own father could not look at him without trembling is the one thread the Creator is keeping intact when everything else unravels. Genesis 6-9 calls Noah Tamim in the original Hebrew. That word does not simply mean morally good. It means whole, complete, without mixture. Scholars of ancient Hebrew have noted that tamim is the same word used to describe an unblemished sacrificial animal, something set apart not because it earned that status, but because it was required for what was coming. Noah's wholeness was not a reward. It was a qualification. He was the one human being whose line had not been corrupted by the Watcher incursion. That is the theological weight Enoch places on this birth. And here is what the standard telling of this story quietly skips. If Noah's bloodline had to be tamim, uncontaminated, complete, without mixture, then the corruption the Watchers introduced was not only spiritual, it was genetic. The sons of God in Genesis 6 did not simply influence human behavior. According to the oldest layers of this tradition, they altered human inheritance itself. And if that is true, what happened to that altered inheritance after the flood? The answer existed in writing. For centuries, it was simply taken away. Not lost, not forgotten by accident. Removed, deliberately, by councils of men who decided what the rest of the world was allowed to read, allowed to question, allowed to know. The Book of Enoch did not disappear because it was obscure. It disappeared because it was specific. It named things. It described the Watchers by their actions. It gave an account of what they taught: humanity, metalworking, cosmetics, enchantments, the cutting of roots knowledge that accelerated human corruption in ways the Genesis account only gestures toward. That level of detail made powerful people uncomfortable. The Council of Laodicea in 363 CE formalized what had already been happening informally for decades, a narrowing of the canon, a restriction of which texts ordinary believers could access. The Book of Enoch, already preserved in Ethiopia, already quoted in the New Testament by Jude, already cited by Tertullian and other early church fathers as authoritative, was placed outside the boundary. One vote, one council, centuries of silence. But Ethiopia held. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church never accepted that removal. They preserved 1st Enoch as part of their biblical canon, not as a curiosity, not as an appendix, but as scripture. Their monks copied it by hand. Generation after generation, in the ancient Gaze language, the full text survived in monasteries built into the sides of mountains, in communities that kept their faith intact through invasions, through colonial pressure, through every force that tried to reshape what they believed. When the Scottish explorer James Bruce brought 3 copies of the Ethiopian Enoch manuscript to Europe in 1773, scholars saw it for the first time in over 1,000 years. What they read matched the fragments they would later find at Qumran. The manuscript tradition was real. The text was ancient. The suppression had worked everywhere except in Africa. That fact alone should stop every reader cold. The text that describes what Lamech saw, what Enoch confirmed, what the pre-flood world actually contained survived because one nation refused to let it go, and what that text says about the Nephilim after the flood, that part still makes theologians go quiet in the middle of sentences. Jesus says it plainly. No interpretation needed. Matthew 24-37. The words are direct. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. He does not say, as it was in the days of Moses, not the days of David, not the days of the great kings or the great prophets. He reaches back specifically to Noah, to that precise moment in human history when the boundary between the divine realm and the human world had been torn open, when corruption had reached into the structure of creation itself, when judgment became not a threat but a certainty. He picks that moment on purpose. The early believers who heard those words still had access to the Book of Enoch. They knew what the days of Noah contained beyond the flood. They knew about the Watchers. They knew about the Nephilim. They knew about a child born glowing in the dark whose own father fled in terror to understand what he was holding. When Jesus said the days of Noah were coming again, those listeners had the full picture. Most modern readers have half of it. And that missing half is not a small detail. It is the frame around the entire warning. The days of Noah were not simply days of moral decline. Human beings have always experienced that. The days of Noah were a specific category of crisis. A structural failure. A moment when things that were never meant to mix had mixed, and the consequences had spread further than any human solution could reach. Noah survived not because he was the best man alive. He survived because he was whole when everything around him had been fractured. That distinction matters now. Not as ancient history, not as archaeology, as a mirror. The question the book of Enoch leaves open, the question Jesus points back to without fully explaining, is one every generation has to answer for itself. What is being mixed today that should not be mixed? This is the part of the story that belongs to the person watching, not to Lamech, not to Methuselah, not to Enoch, standing at the ends of the earth with the answers no one else could carry. The ancient account ends where it ends. The ark is built. The rain comes. The world that had broken itself beyond repair goes under the water. And one family carrying forward the one unbroken human line comes out the other side. But the text does not say the problem ended. Numbers 13:33, the spies return from Canaan after the flood, after the ark, after everything. And they report Nephilim in the land. Still there, still present. The sons of Enoch descended from the Nephilim, standing in Canaan generations after the floodwaters fell. The thing Lamech feared did not drown. It continued. Which means the question Enoch answered, is this child human? Is this child whole? Is this child uncontaminated? That question did not retire with the flood. It echoed forward, into every generation that followed, into the world those spies were looking at, into the world the ancient texts describe continuing long after the mountains dried, into this one. The grief in this story is not that Noah's birth was strange. The grief is that the world that made his birth strange never fully healed. The disruption that began when the watchers crossed the boundary, they were not permitted to cross that disruption, left marks in the land, in the bloodlines, in the silence around texts that were too specific to be kept in ordinary hands. Noah was human. Enoch confirmed it. But the world that needed him to survive that world is still asking the same questions. And Noah was 500 years old. And Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Genesis 5:32 KJV. 3 sons, 1 man, 1 family on the other side of everything. The child Lamech feared became the man through whom every human being alive today traces their survival. The glowing infant whose appearance drove his father into the night became the one whose obedience held the line when every other line broke. The suspected child became the remnant. The feared child became the carrier. That is what the book of Enoch adds to the story of Noah. Not mythology, not invention, grief, a father's terror, a grandfather's long journey, an ancient man's confirmation spoken across distance into the darkness where a new father could not stop shaking. And the questions that story raises about the Nephilim, about what survived the flood, about the tablets and visions Enoch received before the world knew judgment was coming, those questions go deeper than this single documentary can carry. The next chapter of this investigation goes further into the lost Enochic tablets, into what the Watchers actually taught, into what ancient civilizations recorded about what came after. Subscribe now. Turn on notifications. Do not miss what is coming next. The oldest mysteries are still unresolved, and the answers are closer than anyone has told you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your voice in this conversation matters, and it might be the reason someone else finally starts asking the right questions.